varieties. We've got Chenin Blanc and Pinot Grigio, which on the face of them are perhaps two perfectly decent, but shall I dare I say fairly dull varieties. But they do hold some excitements, and I think that's hopefully what we shall try and find out tonight. I mean, if we could start with just Chenin Blanc very quickly. This is a variety which you find in the Loire Valley, principally in France. It's grown elsewhere, but that's where its spiritual or natural home is. And I'm going to come back to that because it's perhaps much better known for producing white wine in South Africa, where it is, I believe, the largest planted variety, a white variety.
It hasn't got the proper thing on.
There we go.
That may be now taken over by other varieties, but anyway, there it is. Used to be known as a thing called Steen, S-T-E-E-N, and it makes perfectly decent, good quality, fair, reasonably priced white wine. Generally speaking, this is a variety that's capable of producing considerable quantities. Interestingly, it flowers early and ripens late, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Well, I'll come back to it now, really, because if we go back to the Loire Valley, you would think that's an extraordinary variety to grow in one of the most northerly wine-growing areas within France, if not the most northerly. Obviously, if it flowers early, you've got risk of frost. It ripens late, you've got risk of the rains and everything else killing the plot. But nevertheless, it does do extremely well. And in the Loire Valley, it makes some sort of absolutely sublime white wine. I think perhaps the best known is probably Vouvray. Then you've got Genière, Bonazieux, Cardechaume, Anjou Blanc, and so on. And I wonder whether anybody will have those here tonight. I would have bought a bottle of Vouvray, actually, if I could have found one locally, which I'm afraid I couldn't, and I hadn't got time to go back to Davies to get one. So it's a variety which is capable of very ordinary, decent wine. That's where you mostly see it, and also some sublime beauties as well. And switching over, but we can build on that. But switching over to Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio, absolutely everybody knows, and there's not a single supermarket that doesn't have it at sort of £6 or £5 or something, and very nice it is too. Obviously it comes from Italy, or this particular variety of it does. It comes usually from Veneto in the northeastern corner, and it has pretty high, you can make pretty high yields out of it, so it's a variety that can give, but it's also a variety which can make some wonderful wines too, which is why I said this is the most interesting variety. Better known, sorry, not better known, it has another name, which of course is Pinot Gris, exactly the same variety, but in France it's called Pinot Gris. In Italy it's called Pinot Grigio. It's also grown quite widely in New Zealand. It's grown in Germany where they call it Ruhlander, and it's grown in Austria where they call it Grauburgunder or something. I can't quite remember, to be quite honest with you. Anyway, this is a variety where you can get enormous yields. You can get up to 100 litres per hectare if you want to, if you're allowed to, rather. So you can see you've got a big quality gap here where you've got the high yielding areas, and then the areas like where you were Pinot Gris. I should have said Pinot Gris is best known, I think, in France for being in Alsace, and that's what I've got tonight, because I got a Pinot Blanc d'Alsace from Maison Becker, and it's what is you know well called an aromatic. It's not always dry, but it's dry-ish. It makes, I think, delicious wine, and it has one huge advantage. It's not Sauvignon Chardonnay. It presents, or even Chenin Blanc under that. It produces a considerable point of difference. The wines made from it are rich and opulent at best, this is, and rounded, and elegant and full of fruit, lovely soft white fruit flavours. So I think that'll probably do to start with. And I hope other people will tell me about the wines, ask about the wines they've got, and we can all discuss those. I wish we could all taste them, but we can't, can we?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got, if I start off with a Chenin Blanc I was lucky somebody gave me some vouchers from a company called Naked Wine, which I got a delivery from of their sort of suggested cases, and one of them was a Ratsbush estate from Stellenbosch in South Africa, Chenin Blanc 2020. And I have to say, it is very delicious and very, very nice and rounded, and has a nice length to it, fruity, and that's $15.99 a bottle. So a little bit more than I would pay for that sort of a wine. But I have to say, it is well worth it, and I feel it's very good value.
I think I can just butt in there. I think that's the key, Paul, actually. If you're paying £15, you're going to get low yields and a much higher quality. And this variety is interesting because it is so variable. You can make so much of it or so little of it, depending on what you want to do.
I have to say, it's very delicious, very delicious.
Yeah. It has a naturally high acidity, as a matter of fact, and in the Loire Valley, they, oddly enough, again, they tend to suppress the malolactic fermentation. Malolactic fermentation is where the malic acid breaks down into lactic acid and CO2, so it reduces the acidity. But oddly enough, for a variety which is grown in the north and which has anywhere near high acidity, they very often, for the better wines, Sauvignon, Cardachaume, Good Anjou Blanc, and Vouvray, and so on, they tend to suppress the malolactic to retain the acidity. And the other thing I should perhaps have said also, it leads naturally Chenin Blanc to making good sparkling wine, because you need high acidity for good sparkling wine.
Yeah.
Martin?
Yes.
Why does ours say no sulfur added? Is it often, do they often have to add sulfur to it?
Well, that's a good point, actually. I mean, it sounds a bit crude, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
In other words, the implication is that sulfur is always added otherwise.
Yeah.
Sulfur is an antioxidant, and therefore was widely used in winemaking. When I first joined the wine trade way back in the very early 1960s, it was commonplace, and you could smell it sometimes on poor wines, because, as I say, it stops the wine oxidizing. Sulfur is used less and less and less, but it is, even so, a part of, an essential part, I would say, of winemaking. But very few growers, or rather fewer and fewer growers use it. I suppose this one's gone over the top and wants to boast about it and suggests that all his competitors use it. But it's pretty unusual. And the fact that it doesn't say no sulfur added doesn't mean to say there's sulfur in it. It doesn't mean to say it's there.
Oh, it's there.
Can I make a point on that, Martin? That we have a bottle from well, Sainsbury's. I have to admit, both our bottles from Sainsbury's. The Chenin Blanc is a South African 2020, it says, and Penny is very averse to the taste of sulfites, and in fact, one actually specifically says, I've just read, it says contains sulfites.
Yeah.
It does give you an alert in that respect, and certainly Penny was able to taste it. What was otherwise very nice wine.
But grapes will have sulfates in them naturally.
Well, they may do. You're a bit ahead of me there, Penny. I'm not quite. Yeah. I'm sure they do, but I think that might suggest that it. I mean, everybody these days, I suppose, is going overboard for honesty and cleanliness and everything else. So maybe they're just covering themselves.
Yeah.
Like this may contain nuts or something. Just as a catch-all.
And it does naturally occur, but there are some cheap plonk you might be handed, and I taste it, and my mouth just dries out completely because it's all sulfates. It's all a preservative thing.
I must say, you are ahead of me. I don't think many grapes have much sulfites in them, but maybe they do. Maybe you.
Well, I might be making the wrong assumptions.
I think possibly. But, you know,
Watch out.
I tell you what, one thing I have learned in my wine trade career is never say no to anything, because it always happens to prove you wrong. Absolutely always.
Martin, could I ask a question, please, to show my ignorance? But I was under the impression that vignerons do put sulphur on their grapes, and I'm wondering what that is intended to do and whether it will affect, as you say, the sulfites in the finished product.
Well, I think that's pretty unlikely, actually. I mean, they may do. Again, I would go back to what I've just said. There's always somebody who does it, or some area where it is prevalent. Normally, that's not where you apply sulphur. I mean, sulphur is perfectly harmless, actually, but it doesn't taste very nice. So you've got to handle it with extreme care.
I mean, is sulphur different from sulfites, or sulfites comes out at the end?
Sulfides, yes, I think it's probably the same thing.
They used to use sulphur as a fungicide.
Yeah.
Applied to grapevines, and over recent years they've stopped doing that because of EC regulations and things like that. But it was a lime sulphur that they sprayed to stop fungicide or fungal.
You used to play with copper sulfate spray, but you can't do that nowadays.
No.
Haven't done for years, actually. You're right. It was commonplace.
Martin, aren't sulfides the deposits left in the bottle if there's been sulphur in it, too much sulphur in it, and you get little gritty bits? Are those sulfides?
No.
No.
Tartaric crystals.
Yes, exactly. Tartaric acid crystals, most likely, anyway.
Right.
I've always understood that tartaric crystals in a wine often indicate the quality of the wine.
Yes, it means the tartaric acid has sort of matured and deposited its crystals, and therefore the acidity has been matured and will be the better for it. Mellower, rather.
Yeah.
On the additive of sulfites, some asthmatics are actually allergic to it.
Yeah.
So it's useful to know if there is. I've noticed with some cheap wines, if there's sulfites added, I really do actually notice that. But more expensive wines, even though they might have sulfites, it's not so visible on my asthma side, as it were.
Well, that is probably why they say it's there, because somebody might get a reaction. But as I say, I don't want to leave people with the impression that sulfur is used less and less and less, really.
But it's certainly a naturally occurring thing in certain grapes. For example, if you're having dried fruit, currants don't. But if you have the raisins, they're more yellowy, and some of them, probably more natural ones, really have got a lot of sulfate in. You can just taste it, that's all.
Penny, are you sure they haven't been treated to keep them?
Goodness only knows, my darling. Goodness only knows.
I suspect that may be what it is, that if you're packing them up, you treat them with sulfur as an antioxidant to protect them from deterioration. That's the most likely explanation.
I think.
But anyway, why don't we come up with somebody else who's got another interesting bottle of wine to
William.
Well, mine is not particularly unusual, and it's absolutely on the message from Loire. It's from Saumur, south side of the river. It's from Waitrose. It was on offer, and it cost £7.49, which actually it's a very nice wine. Great aperitif. I'm not sure that I eat a lot of food with it, but it's quite acidic, I think.
Yeah.
But I guess that's sort of North France Loire type of wine, and but very pleasant.
Well, I think that's lovely. Saumur is a lovely, lovely area, and it makes lovely, lovely wine. And if you go buy white wines from or any wine actually, well, particularly white wines from the Loire Valley, you are going to get a fairly high acidity. A, because a lot of them are made from Chenin Blanc, and B, because you are quite far north, therefore you're going to get less sunshine, more acidity, and so on. And that's what you buy into, which is why Sauvignon in Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé is considerably more acidic than Sauvignon Blanc grown in New Zealand. But it's a question of what you like and what you want.
Mm.
Are they trying to grow Chenin Blanc in England? Or is
I
that
would think it highly unlikely. I mean, again, as soon as I say no, someone's going to pop up and say their next door neighbour is doing it. I think it's very, very unlikely. I never heard of it, I must say.
Yeah.
Hi. Can I just interject at this particular point in time? I have got a bottle of Pinot Gris from Denby's, and Denby's is the biggest vineyard in the UK. They provide over 10% of the UK grapes, and this is a 2015 Pinot Gris. It is very aromatic. It's got a lovely colour. It's a sort of quite a deep yellow colour. It does need a bit of food to go with it. I wouldn't really sort of drink it by itself, but it is quite a rich wine, and I think it's lovely to be able to drink a local wine. I mean, Denby's is literally just sort of 10 miles down the road from me. So buy British, buy Denby's. It is a little bit more expensive. This was
buy English.
So why can they get away with?
Maybe on our own very soon.
Why can they get away?
I love to hear that, Nick. I know Denby's well. It's a wonderful estate, and they were early into English wines on a big scale. And I think a Pinot Gris from there will be excellent. Yes, you're going to get the acidity, but then most wines, that's not true any longer. I believe wine and food are absolutely interlinked, and I think wine is best with food, and you need that acidity to keep the wine interesting in the mouth when you're drinking it with food. So I think it's a lovely combination, and it's all the things that you say: rounded, aromatic, plump, full of character and spice and so on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We live down the road from Denby's also, and one of the things I remember on one of their lectures when they were fighting about the title of the name Champagne is that geographically they have the same terrain, terroir, whatever, as the country.
Yes,
but of course the ocean.
You still can't call it Champagne, though.
Yeah.
Champagne is a geographical location. I mean, you're too. I was just going to say, do you remember the famous Champagne case of, must have been 1959, then again in 1962? Well, you don't because you're too young, but I do, just about. And the Champenois sued the Spanish cava growers who were calling their wine Spanish Champagne. They lost the case, and they won it, I think, 2 or 3 years later. It was against a man called Michael Brills, funnily enough, who was marketing Spanish cava in big time. And ever since then, the Champagne growers have been absolutely virulent, is that the right term, about protecting their name. Even, I was told on one occasion, they stopped somebody calling it Champagne chocolates or something.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, but now that the Champagne owners are buying in Kent, what are they going to call their wine when they sparkle it? But Nick, how much was your wine from Denby's?
Well, they don't sell it anymore, actually, and I actually had it in my cellar. So, but I think a 2018 bottle would be £18.95.
Yeah, I said I'm going to say 20 quid or something. Yeah.
Yeah, they're quite pricey, I think.
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
Generally, pretty nice outfit, very nice family that owns it, and it is good that it's a very successful wine-making operation. Now, Martin, I have, and first of all, I must apologise for arriving late. I'm afraid business calls got in the way, but I've broken the golden rule. You do.
Got the wrong wine.
I didn't have either of your chosen preferred wines, so I thought I would try something with you that I thought was very unusual. I only ever drink French wines, so I'm boring from that point of view, and I prefer them from the south of France, Bordeaux or the Rhone Valley. I like the Loire wines slightly less. But I was intrigued to find an Albarino grown in the Aude Valley in the south. And I have to say, holding it up, I don't know whether the camera picks it up properly.
Yeah, they're
but
lovely.
it's a stunning wine, really beautiful. Comes from the village of Le Grasse, which is a tourist village. Do you know anything about it?
Well, no, Albarino is a grape variety. It's growing widely in Spain, of course.
Yes.
Well, is it from a single estate or from a cooperative, or?
It's a single estate, and I bought it from a French wine wholesaler called Varietals a couple of days before the 31st of December, because they won't ship to England any longer.
As a variety, it's not very widely grown in France, but if it's going to be grown anywhere, it's going to be grown in the south. But it's a variety that thrives in hot climates.
Laurent Miguel is the winemaker who has a pretty comprehensive collection of winemaking facilities in that part of the world.
But what's it taste like, Richard?
An upmarket Sauvignon Blanc, if there is such a thing. It has minerality, but significant minerality. The grapes are pretty ancient, which again surprised me because I didn't think Albarino was ever grown in France until quite recently. But this must be pretty close to the Spanish border.
Yeah, well, I think
it's a delightful wine, and from France it cost €13 delivered, but not on its own. So
you say the grapes are old, the vines are old. Does it say how old, or?
No, it doesn't.
Just as old vines, vieilles.
Yeah. And I trust Laurent Miguel because he's got a reputation to lose if he says the wrong things.
Yes. No, well, in all my time buying in France, and I've bought widely all over France, really, I don't think people will always tell you the truth. Well, that's why I always fell for it anyway. So people will not tell you porcupine, generally speaking.
And I would say it's a delightful wine. If I was blindfolded, I would have thought it was coming from a much more expensive part of France than down south.
What a lovely find.
Yeah. Well, I bought a few more of them. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Is Albarino the grape variety, Richard?
Yes.
Albarino.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is typically Spanish, and I happen to quite like it as a Spanish wine grape. But this has got a considerable degree of extra sophistication to it somehow. Can't explain it. I'll send you a glass, Martin.
You can send me a bottle, Richard, if you like.
How nice of you. Thank you so much.
Richard, it's the French je ne sais quoi.
Yes, probably.
Does it?
Anybody else got any gems?
But just before we go on there, just something that Richard said sparked a question in my mind, and maybe the audience here knows the answer. But now we're out of the EU. I'm led to believe that we can actually bring back 24 bottles tax-free if we go and when we go to France. Is that right? And does anyone know what we pay on the 25th bottle as tax to the EU?
I think you'll find all 25 get taxed.
If you come back with 25?
If you go over whatever the limit is, yes.
And what is the rate on the bottle? Do you know?
I don't know.
Well, I'm out of touch. I'm not involved in the commercial world of wine anymore. But I think it's about £26 a dozen or something of that before VAT. So what, £2 something or other per bottle?
VAT.
Something of that region.
Yeah, Google says it's £2.68 plus VAT per bottle.
Okay, well that's
Well, that sounds very conclusive.
But it's the same whether you buy a wine costing you 5 francs a bottle or 105 francs a bottle. So in other words, pro rata, it's less important at the expensive end than it is at the cheap end, obviously.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shame.
That's excise, isn't it? Not customs duty. So it's inevitable. I mean, you can't avoid it really if it's excise duty rather than customs duty.
Exactly.
The secret is to drink it whilst in France. They won't charge you, bringing it back in your tummy.
Yeah, then drive home.
Then on earth will we ever be able to go to France again?
Well, that's also true.
I imagine it's 24 bottles, is it? So if you take one or two friends with you, like a wife.
Mine, wife or friend?
Or a present husband.
I thought you said friend.
What about a dog? They have to have passports now too, don't they?
Indeed.
Always had to have passports, master.
Yes. So they should be entitled to bring back 24 bottles of wine as well.
Am I wrong? I thought that part of the deal was that we should still be allowed to ship back under the same terms as before. Have I missed something there?
They did say that the booze cruise would now be cancelled. Now we were in.
Oh, didn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was something like 14 bottles. Is a very small amount.
Oh, really?
Compared to normal, yeah.
Well, as an ex-wine merchant, I'm approve of that. I thought it was disgraceful that people from Greenback buy a UK wholesaler.
I remember once Martin and I were actually stopped coming back because we used to buy everything in France, and it was when the sort of people trafficking was really at its height. And she stopped us and said, "Can I look in your boot?" And I said, "Well, there's rather a lot of wine in our boot. I don't care as long as there's no people." So she said, "You're right. There's no room for any people in your boot."
The best I did was 10 dozen one day.
I don't know what we did.
Every single crack and gap in the car was full of it.
Yes, we've done something similar.
The rule was it was brought back for personal consumption.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
You could drink 10 dozen bottles.
I took a wedding invitation with me and pretended I was having a wedding at home.
That's fine.
We just said it was for us.
Quantity, you had to pay duty.
But latterly, they just gave up caring. They didn't even bother. You're quite right. It's supposed to be for personal consumption.
Yeah.
But the customs didn't bother. And I must say, as somebody dealing in wine, we didn't actually do a retail personal trade hardly at all. It's outrageous, really, that the customer should be able to choose which duty regime he or she should pay. So it didn't seem right to me, but there you are. Maybe I'm biased, or was biased.
Just old-fashioned, Martin.
Old-fashioned. I know. I know.
I have to confess that I'm on the naughty step because I've always been rather bored by Pinot Grigio because presumably I've never paid enough or been willing to pay enough. I'm sure that's the answer. I've got a nice bottle of Viognier, which is a bit different, and I just had one bottle, so I thought, well, I'll open that and I'll learn about the other wines, which I have. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, Viognier is a lovely variety, I think. I've always loved it.
Yes.
We had that last time but one, didn't we, Paul?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. I'm sorry to have missed it.
Yeah, lovely variety. Interesting and different and aromatic and...
Yes.
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with David. I've historically been a bit sniffy about Pinot Grigio, but just lately I've had a little adventure and been a little bit more open to seeing what it does. And I've got one which is from Venice or from Venetia, and it's one made by a guy called Paolo Sacaccio, and it's £8.99. I have to say, it is really very nice indeed. And he's apparently known as the king of Prosecco, so his winemaking is quite highly thought of. And it's quite light, very quaffable, and very easy drinking. I quite like it indeed. Very good. Be very good for an evening's pasta.
From the same grape. Does Prosecco come from the same grape, from Chenin Blanc?
No, Pinot Grigio.
Pinot Grigio, rather. Yeah.
Filera. Anyway.
You may want.
I didn't mean to be rude about Pinot Grigio. Sorry. I mean, what I was trying to say was, it's a workhorse. It's fit all sizes at one end, and it can be perhaps sublime, pushing it a bit. But it can be very, very good at the other end. That's all I'm trying to say.
You get a huge variety.
Providing you pay a fair amount, then you can pretty well guarantee the yields are lower and the quality is going to be higher. So I'm not being rude about it, except that just saying it's infinitely variable.
Very good to know. And the other thing I've learned is that talking about Chenin Blanc and Vouvray, I remember as a student, I dare to say over 60 years ago, it was the only white wine we drank at parties. We just drank a lot of Vouvray.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that, I must re-engage myself with Vouvray, I think.
You went to very posh parties.
Posh to you. Very posh.
I think we were Blue Nun, actually. Yes. Were you too?
Yeah.
That's a previous generation, I think. But David, I like you.
Call it Blue Nun.
Blue Nun.
We used to
little bottles of San Nicola.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's awful.
It's Nicola.
Matches Rosé.
Oh,
The worst wine in the whole world is bull's blood.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That wine when you brought the bottle home and made a table lamp, straw.
The kitchen table left over for desperation was bull. Oh.
San Nicola could actually double as paint stripper.
Martin, what happened to Nicola? I mean,
I hope it went underground in a big way.
I don't think so. They are huge French wine merchants or wine.
Are they still going? Are they still?
Nicola, yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes,
They are. They're huge.
I looked everywhere for their shops.
They went bankrupt in Britain and are were going to be retrenching.
They produced wonderful wine lists, absolutely beautiful in the 30s and the 40s and sent in the 50s. And I got quite a collection of them, beautifully produced, lovely lithographs. That if you can find them, they're worth collecting.
Nicola have over 500 stores in the world.
Go.
Come on. Are you on a mission to go to each one of them, Paul?
No, I'm not.
That's a good bucket list.
You did very well out of Beaujolais Nouveau.
Like David, I'd forgotten that Vouvray was a Chenin Blanc, and we had actually had several bottles of Vouvray in the cellar because we often drink it as just a very pleasant aperitif drinkable wine. And in France, going back to David's earlier days, it used to be the celebratory wine of, it's pétillant, it's slightly sparkling, or can be, and a very pleasant wine to drink. But we're drinking, I think it may be the same Sainsbury's bottle as Penny and David are drinking of Chenin Blanc from Wellington in South Africa, and thinking wistfully of exactly this time last year when, Paul, we were in Stellenbosch and Franschhoek drinking the wine and going around to Klein Constantia and Buchten Vechtig, is it? The wonderful vineyard down there, and so on in the Western Cape. So, a bit nostalgic at the moment. But the Chenin Blanc from South Africa is
Lovely.
very pleasant. It's mellow. Yes, I understand what Penny's saying about the sulfites, but if it is the same one, is it the same one, David? Benny?
Yeah. Looks like, yeah, I would say.
Peter and Penny.
Yeah,
Peter, not David.
absolutely. Yeah. Snap. Snap.
Yeah.
How much was it?
Great
Can't
wine.
remember.
I said it'll go off to Sainsbury's, so I don't know.
At £8, £7.99, I think they always had
Probably
these.
something like that. Sounds about right. Yeah.
It's a very pleasant Chenin Blanc. Ah, that's a different
What's
one.
that one?
Oh, that's from Paul. Ah,
Yeah,
right.
It's got a horse in the front of it.
Oh, a horse. Good grief.
It's more like a zebra.
A stripy horse.
Stripy horse.
With pajamas on.
Oh dear, they're slipping away,
Oh,
Mr. Clark. You do
Degenerating
realise
now,
that, don't you?
people.
It's always a mistake to have 2 bottles rather than 1.
This one's from South Africa.
Ah,
Rustler.
The Rustler,
Is that
2020.
the Hustler? Who can't...
Rustler.
Oh,
Rustler.
Rustler. God,
Yeah.
that took me back.
Well, that says that it's got added sulfites, containing sulfite, and it says that it's for adventurers who like good seafood and the odd succulent Overberg lamb chop.
Have an odd lamb chock.
Well, it sort of bears out what I was saying in the beginning, that Chenin Blanc has very much become South Africa's own, if you see what I mean. I mean, I think its reputation was built up in France and in the Loire Valley, but it translated or transmuted very well to South Africa. And here we see all sorts of different growers using it and doing good things with it.
Martin,
May I offer you another one?
yeah, please at all. If I paid £8 for this bottle and then someone else had paid £20, would I as a quaffer really know the difference? And what might be the difference really?
That's a very profound question, really. I think basically you would, but I think you need to sort of understand wine a bit, which everybody in this room or on this screen does. Yes, I think you would, because you're going to, for £8, £20, the likelihood is you'll get much lower yields at £20. There'll be more concentration, more depth. The acidity will be riper and fresher. The fruit will be of very fine quality. You would, but you'd need to look for it, wouldn't you? I mean, if you paid £20, you're not going to stick it down your neck, easily. You're going to take a little time over it.
Oh,
and I think you would notice it, actually. I hope so, anyway. If you didn't,
so do I.
Things gone wrong.
And bear in mind that you're also paying A, more tax, B, more for the glass bottle, and the more you pay for the wine, the more you pay for the wine.
Yes, exactly.
So
No, that's
for
the
a
point.
bottle of wine, you are paying more for the wine at a higher price because
Yes, the on costs are the same, whether you're paying, if you say, the glass, the carton, the label, and crucially, the duty is the same, whether only the VAT. Oh, no, yeah, no, VAT is different, of course.
You're right.
Thank you very much.
Allow me to introduce a bargain basement South African Chenin Blanc. This is First Cape Bush Vine Chenin Blanc, 2020. Wine of Western Cape, South Africa. The beautiful vineyards of the floral kingdom of the Western Cape are farmed for their fresh and juicy expression. The Chenin Blanc grape mature bush vines give this wine flavors of soft white peach and ripe apples, fresh and juicy. This special cuvee Chenin Blanc is perfect on its own or with seafood and creamy pasta dishes. It is actually quite light and refreshing. It has an acidity to it. It's obtainable from Waitrose, normal price £7.79, reduced to £4.99.
Good God.
Yeah.
Waitrose is getting desperate, Master.
Bargain basement. It's quite refreshing.
little bit of nostalgia for Martin. I went to a tasting hosted by Ken Butler in the 80s, and it was at the Institute of Directors, and he had a collection of wines that had accumulated over many years, that was sort of what he regarded as the golden oldies. And he had this table, apart from his usual collection of wines, he had this one table which was called the golden oldies, and he brought these special bottles out. He got his wife to stand on the table and pour the wines, which I don't know whether that was significant or not. He actually produced a 1928 Vouvray.
Yeah.
Ooh. And it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
The acidity had gone, and it was such a lovely, lovely wine. I mean, you could just, I wanted to stand there and drink that and nothing else.
It doesn't surprise me at all, Paul. I'm delighted to hear you tell the story. Vouvray keeps an immense length of time. It's grown, as you know, and others perhaps know too, on this famous tufa chalk which they have. And if it's well made, Chenin Blanc on tufa chalk will keep for ages and ages and ages. And some of the oldest wines, well, some of the oldest wines I've ever drunk have been Vouvray, and they are delectable. They're almost impossible to find now.
Well, Mr. Clark, you'll remember, I'm sure, the 1990 Vouvrays that we continue to drink.
I think I still have some in the drawer.
There is still some, and I can now tell you there's some round the corner as well now. Both sparkling and still, ladies and gentlemen. Ever so good.
Did you nick them when you left Paul's house?
Strangely, no. I left them there. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter. It's all good.
We were talking about Mathieu's Rosé, which I think its best application in those days was as a lamp base. You had to empty it just in case there was an electrical short. But I also remember one of my least liked wines in the world, Black Tower.
Yeah.
I don't think
Black Tower.
And that was also for a lamp base. Really nice in those days. Oh no, there is Mathieu's.
You mentioned the war and you...
There's no lampshade on it, Edgar. No. Where's the lampshade gone?
It's the worst one.
Oh, look.
Yes. It was a lot more expensive
Surely, colleagues, as glass sellers, we should be celebrating the time when the bottle was worth more than the wine inside it, rather than the other way round.
The whole thing, it did me so much harm.
Edgar, where did you get that, Edgar?
The Pollock Hills have got a conflict of interest, haven't they?
Deirdre and I went
Why?
Deirdre and I went cruising down the Douro.
Hi, David.
I got it down there as a memento.
So how long ago did you buy it?
3 years.
No, you can still buy it. I do have a friend. Yeah, you can still buy it. I have a friend who's slightly wacky, shall we say, in the extreme, and it's all she drinks with every day. They've never worked, either of them. They have a very idyllic lifestyle, shall we say, but completely bizarre. And every photograph of her, she has her Mathieu's Rosé in her glass full of ice. I did buy a bottle some time ago. It's a lot more than the 50p that I paid when we were in Portugal. Martin was a little horrified. We were a little disappointed.
Well, it was a marketing phenomenon, wasn't it, really?
Oh, yeah.
It went from zero to being the biggest selling wine in the UK.
The cork was always
zero again, pretty well.
I have to say that on a hot summer's day, a bottle of Mathieu's Rosé, or I do an evening of Mathieu's Rosé revisited. And I've done it periodically, just on a whim. And in fact, I think we did it last summer. We had an evening and we just drank Mattias Rosé, really, really cold. And it was lovely, sat in the garden on a hot, balmy evening.
Absolutely.
Very,
Very
very,
good at all.
very pleasant.
No, I agree with that.
When you say a bottle, though, you don't mean the bottle, though, do you, Mr. Clark?
Please do not expose me.
Does it get better with quantity?
Oh, it only comes for the food, not the wine.
Excuse me.
Well, normally I do the food and I make my guests bring the wine. So
that's precisely my point.
There could be worse things.
We went to the estate where Mattias Rosé used to be made, and all their buildings there have got chestnut rafters, so they have no problems whatsoever with Death Watch beetle. Just as an aside.
That's something I never knew.
Martin, many years ago, Austria went through a little bit of an embarrassing phase by being found out adding antifreeze.
Get the cars going there.
What was the grape variety that they would have been using at that point, or was it all grape?
Well, it would have been, I'm not quite sure, Riesling possibly. I can't really remember. Or Gruneveltliner, was it?
Yes.
It wasn't actually antifreeze, though.
Well, the antifreeze scandal was absolutely 100% wrong.
Yes, quite right.
But you would have needed to have drunk about 14 gallons in one evening to have had any effect whatsoever. I think the point was it began to endanger the whole image of wine. Once you start, there are people about who will tell you that wine is full of additives and this, that, and the other, and basically it isn't. Of course, there are things that we were talking about sulfur earlier on, but to add things to it, to artificially sweeten it effectively by putting in this whatever it's called, the antifreeze, that was a lovely line the newspapers made up. It wasn't, of course, antifreeze, but it was one of the things that went in to make antifreeze.
Glycol.
So it ruined the Austrian wine industry absolutely completely. And only now, what was that, 30 years ago maybe?
Yeah.
Only now is it beginning to creep back gradually, rebuild itself.
I think it was also Germany, wasn't it?
Well, it was a bit in Germany too.
Pirov, who really suffered under it.
I thought it was Italy.
No, it was a specific year, and I think it was the early 80s, late 70s, where the harvest was specifically low in sugar, and therefore they used one of the glucose syrups to actually, instead of using Swiss Reserve, which is what they often use, they added this sugar, and as I say, the press picked it up and decided it was antifreeze, but it actually wasn't antifreeze.
No, it wasn't antifreeze at all.
Made an excellent story, unfortunately.
Well, it's a bit like the Spanish olive oil crisis, where they put in the cooking fat, or no, whatever it was. No, engine oil into cooking oil.
It actually killed people, didn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, but it was devastating. We at that early on in the early 1960s had cellars opposite Lyons Hop Exchange cellars, which were bottling massive quantities of stuff called Schluck. Do you remember that? No.
Oh gosh.
Well, it was a huge Austrian brand, and that went on happily until this moment, and it was wiped out overnight. Completely went.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because you can get some really, really nice Austrian Eisweins.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Austrian wines are excellent.
Yes.
What's the Austrian antifreeze like?
No idea.
Well, if you're hard up,
does it ruin your car?
My very first jolly to Vienna, that was the very first glass cellars event, which I loved very much, and we went on a very interesting tour of a vineyard run by an Englishman, I seem to remember, Is there anyone else who can recall this dim and distant past trip to Vienna?
Yes, we do.
And we did go to a vineyard, I'm sure.
Phil
Dumplings.
Phil Cook.
Everything.
Did you go out to Grinzing?
I do remember the dumplings.
And I thought it was very nice, their wine.
Did you go out to Grinzing?
I have no idea where we went at all, I'm afraid.
There speaks the glass fella.
There speaks a jolly.
I've no doubt, Peter, you were pissed most of the time.
No idea where I went.
Grinzing is the most extraordinary little village outside Vienna that is open for 22 hours of the day. And you can go out there, they make the local wine and sell it in about 20 or 30 restaurants. And you queue up like a supermarket for your food and order your food from the counter, a sort of picnic, and you sit down at tables under the vines and the lights with the Austrian music playing and drink this charming, rather characterless wine, but it goes down very nicely in a warm summer evening.
Because I think one of the characteristics I remember of Austrian wine is it often finishes very quickly. It doesn't linger on the palate very long.
But it you're using it to get down you. That's because you're using it to get the dumplings down.
Oh, Penny. Typical Penny.
Martin, talking about unusual wines, the wines of Anjou do not have a great reputation. However, I was very fortunate about 20 years ago to buy a couple of cases of a rather unusual one. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but you can see what the label is. Wine.
Higher.
I can't see it.
Right.
No, I can't. My eyesight's not that good. So.
That's better.
Oh, I can see the Anjou. Yep. Who's the grower?
Well, it's called Moulin Touché.
Oh, okay.
Do you know the story of Moulin Touché?
No, you can tell me though.
He was a garagist in the Anjou, not far from Angers, who collected wines. When he repaired people's cars, particularly wine growers' cars, he got paid in bottles of wine. And he had this wonderful cellar behind, carved into troglodyte cellar, carved in there. And he had about 50 years of wine stashed away there. And they discovered nobody knew that Anjou wine ages very well. And suddenly Decanter discovered this, particularly 1959, was a wonderful vintage. And these bottles were selling at their peak for about £350 each, if you could get hold of them. Wow. I was lucky I got one for under a case for under £20 a bottle.
Goodness.
Monsieur Touché was not a wine grower, he was a garagist, and he repaired cars. But he obviously had a very good palate. And it's something, if you want to look up on the internet, that's very, very rare. 59 is an amazing.
Stephen,
Controle, it's called.
Stephen, would that garagist have been able to fix your Tesla when you drove past?
It's before Elon Musk was even born. We did break down in a Jaguar XJ12 outside Nantes, and had to have a piece flown over from Coventry that cost 50p. But it took a week for us staying in a hotel. We started in a very smart Relais Chateau and ended up in a Novotel.
Shame on you. Shame on you. A glass cellar staying in a Novotel, honestly.
Yeah, how crap is that, honestly? Dear, oh dear.
Right. Well, I'm going to just say we've diversified an awful lot from our grape varietals tonight. And I hope you've all enjoyed the ones that you got. We did talk about Sauvignon Blanc being grown in the United Kingdom. It's actually
inside the garage.
Sauvignon Blanc is grown in Ireland, North Wales, Norfolk, and Central England as well. As well as the West Country down to Devon and Cornwall, and Hampshire, of course, and Suffolk.
That's the Sauvignon Blanc, is it you're saying?
Sauvignon Blanc, yes.
Yeah. What about the Chenin?
Very interesting.
Another Chenin Blanc.
No, no Chenin Blanc. I haven't found any Chenin Blanc in the UK.
What's that?
Some of the things. But I mean, we're almost up to time now. Does anybody want to say any closing words?
Thank you very much, Paul, for organising it again.
Thanks, Martin.
Martin, very much.
Yes, Martin, certainly.
Been another
As always, great fun.
On behalf of the company, thank you very much to Martin for another fascinating.
One inside the game, you did earlier.
And to Paul for putting it all together. A most convivial evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just remind you, I'll be sending notes out over the weekend. We are being entertained next Thursday, the 4th of February, by the Lady Mayoress, Hilary Russell, who will be talking about keeping bees on the roof of Mansion House.
Oh.
Thought it might be Ted.
And I'll be showing off.
Ted to come along to that one.
I'll be showing off my pot of Lady Mayoress.
Oh, for goodness sake, honestly. Dear, oh dear.
And on that note, I think we better leave before Richard tells us anything else that might be.
Already, Richard.
Good night,
Good night, all. Have a very nice
night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Martin.